Okay, there's just a couple places that I want to throw some things out here in the book that jump out at me every time I read this book. There's lots of imagery, there's lots of things that you can do with this book. There's just tons of things. Your only stopping point is your own imagination. But toward the beginning, one thing that really jumps out at me is in the chapter "Who is the Man Who Rides Past," which is about King Christian X. There's a place where they're talking about Norway and how Denmark, and the girls are talking about that Denmark is a pink spot, or Norway is a pink spot on the map in school. And the statement, the imagery here is that um, Norway was pink on the school map. She imagined the pink strip of Norway crushed by a fist. This would be an excellent spot right here for a sketch to stretch. Let the kids draw. What does that mean to you? What does that show you? Talk about that imagery of that pink spot on a map and then a big fist coming down and crushing it. There's a lot of that in this book. Lois Lowry does a beautiful job of imagery and thinking. Another spot that always jumps out at me is at the last paragraph of "Who is the dark haired one?" This is where the Nazi soldiers come in the middle of the night into the apartment and get them up. And then they've got two blonde kids, and then they've got this dark haired girl. And the father, Anne Marie's dad, quick thinking, grabs the family albums and pulls out baby pictures because Anne Marie's sister, her older sister, who is dead at this point, was had darker hair as a young child, and so they try to pass off Ellen as this sister. And at the very end, this is where Anne Marie has Ellen's. She ripped Ellen's Star of David necklace off and has it clutched in her fist. And the very last paragraph says, Anne Marie relaxed the clenched fingers of her right hand, which still clutched Ellen's necklace. She looked down and saw that she had imprinted the Star of David into her palm. What does that imagery show you? Can you go deeper than just the picture of a Star of David imprinted on her palm? We've talked about that when we did this before as a literature study. Think about the imagery there. What was being imprinted? Who were being imprinted? Think about the Jews, how they were having the numbers written in ink in their arms. About the Star of David, the piece being put on the Jews' clothing so they could be quickly identified. That there is so much imagery that can be pulled from this book that you really need to pull some of these things. The other thing is, look at the titles of the chapters. Can you tell the story just from the title of the chapters? Why are you running? Who is the man that rides past? Where is Mrs. Hirsch? It will be a long night. Can you have your kids take those titles and put those into a story? Those titles completely, once you've read the book and you look back at the titles, you can put the story together very easily by those titles. You can use that as a pre-reading strategy. Look at the titles of this book, of these chapters in the book. Can you put a story together from that? What do those titles tell you? There are so many activities you can do with this book. Now, in the literature study at the end, what we would have done is little sideline individual pieces. The first one was, what would you have in your literate environment? What would be in your classroom to make it a literate environment for this literature study? Would you have maps? Would you have charts? Would you have books that went along with Number the Stars? I've given you links to 3 different books that I would have read in the class. We would have spoken about those. One of them has a direct correlation to Number the Stars, and that's Legend of the Star, the King Christian X. Well, that the connection there is obvious, but I use that as a think aloud. I have post-it notes in my copy of the book, and I have questions on those post-it notes, and I would stop periodically and show you how you do a think aloud with that. The other two are just trade books. One is Hey Little Ant, and the other one is The Other Side. Both of those books can be used for all kinds of things. But let's talk about bullying with this. Can you pull in bullying? Yes. So how are you going to add that to your littered environment? What are you going to put in your littered environment? Are you going to have anchor charts? What would you put in there? The other piece to the individual is Louise Rosenblatt's ideas of that readers take efferent stances to reading and they take aesthetic stances to reading. We do that multiple times during a read. So the efferent stance is, what did you learn? What are some new things that you've learned? Well, if I think about Number the Stars, one of the things I learned was I had no earthly idea, because I'm not a geography person, that Sweden was at that close to Denmark, that it was just a little zip across the water. I didn't know that. Well, another piece was when the dogs, they had the stuff on the handkerchief to throw to numb the dog's smell. So they couldn't smell anything, so they couldn't find the people on the boats. I didn't know anything about that. There were several things in this book that when I read it for the very first time, King Christian X, I'd never heard of King Christian X. I did some looking up on King Christian X. The people in Denmark, especially in Copenhagen, where his palace was, they loved him. They loved this man. I'd never heard of him before I read this book. I'd never read an account of World War II from the Danish perspective. Most of the accounts of World War II you hear from the Jewish perspective in Germany or in Poland. But in Denmark, no, I did not. I had never heard that before. And now the aesthetic stance. The aesthetic stances that we take when we read are emotional stances. Whether you were scared, like when the Nazis are banging on the door in the middle of the night, 4 o'clock in the morning, and now we've got this dark-haired child in there that was not what they called Aryan. She was not blonde haired and blue eyed, and she was obviously different. What's going to happen? The first time I read this book, it scared me to death. When the soldiers at the beginning of the book stopped the girls on their way home from school, that was a scary thing. There were things that were funny. The little kitten that was following, and Kirsty, how she tried to make a almost a baby doll out of that kitten, and the kitten wasn't having any part of it. I laughed at that because I can relate to that here at my house with our two cats. Were you scared? Were you happy? Were you sad? Were you confused? Those are all aesthetic, emotional stances that we take to reading. If you take that one step further, the underlying piece in Rosenblatt's theory is that reading is just words on a page until the reader brings something to the read. In other words, there's nothing going in the book if you're not reading it. Sometimes I get so involved in a book and I'm thinking, oh man, what's going on if I'm not reading it? Nothing's going on because I'm not reading it. But that was her whole premise, is that readers bring to the book what you will, and not every reader brings the same things to a book, which allows for multiple perspectives. It allows for multiple views of a book, and that's the richness in what is called a grand conversation when you have those in a classroom, when you're doing a literature study or something of this nature with your students, because everybody brings their own background, they bring their own knowledge, to the study. So we're going to leave this right here for now. I have a couple more things I want to get done and post for you, but one is going to have to be a video the old way because I need to do some manipulating of words. So I will leave this right now and remind you to wash your hands, use your hand sanitizer, don't hoard the toilet paper, and I hope this finds you happy and healthy. And I will talk to you again soon.